My name's Elizabeth, and I just turned 17 when my life took a wild turn. Let me paint you a picture of my family. On the surface, we seemed decent enough. Dad worked his ass off, and Mom stayed home. I had a little sister, Amy, who was 12 years younger than me. Dad was a big shop manager at this company that belonged to my maternal grandmother. Grandma was a real go-getter. She started with a chain of laundromats, then expanded into making household chemicals and detergents for laundries. When she decided to retire, she offered the business to Mom. But she wasn't interested. So Dad stepped up and took over the company. That's when things started to get complicated. I remember the day it all went to shit. I was in my room, trying to focus on homework, when I heard Mom screaming at Dad downstairs. "You're nothing but a loser, John. This is my house, my family's business. You should be grateful I even let you run it." Things got worse over the next few weeks. Mom and Dad barely spoke to each other, and when they did, it usually ended in a shouting match. I tried to keep Amy distracted, but even at 5, she knew something was wrong. Then came the day that changed everything. I came home from school to find Dad in the living room, a suitcase at his feet. "Dad?" My voice cracked. "What's going on?" He walked over to me, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I can't stay here anymore. It's not good for anyone." I felt like I couldn't breathe. But what about Amy? What about me? Dad pulled back, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. "I love you both so much. Never forget that. But sometimes love isn't enough." He kissed my forehead, then walked over to Amy, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. He knelt down, hugging her tightly. "Be good for your big sister, okay, pumpkin?" And just like that, he was gone. The door closed behind him with a finality that left me feeling hollow. Mom came home an hour later. When I told her Dad had left, she didn't seem surprised. She just nodded, like she'd been expecting it. "Good riddance," she muttered. "Mom, I couldn't believe what I was hearing." "How can you say that?" She turned to me, her eyes hard. "Your father cheated on me, Elizabeth. Multiple times. I couldn't take it anymore." That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear Mom on the phone in her room. She was laughing, sounding happier than I'd heard her in months. I wondered who she was talking to, but I was too exhausted to care. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated after Dad left, Mom dropped another bombshell on us. "Girls," she announced one morning over breakfast, "I have some news. I'm getting married." I nearly choked on my cereal. "What? Mom, Dad's only been gone for 2 months." She waved her hand dismissively. "Sometimes, true love comes unexpectedly, Elizabeth. You'll understand when you're older." Robert moved in a week later. He was, okay, I guess. Tall, good-looking in that generic way that makes people say, "Oh, he seems nice." But something about him rubbed me the wrong way from the start. He made an effort with Amy, playing games with her and helping her with her homework. But with me? It was like I barely existed. Meanwhile, changes were happening at the company too. Mom had taken over after Dad left, and she brought Robert in to work with her. They seemed to make a good team, always huddled together, discussing business strategies. I tried to focus on my own life, school, friends, the usual teenage stuff. But it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling that I was becoming invisible in my own family. Things came to a head when Mom and Robert announced they were opening a new branch of the company in another city. "We're moving," Mom told me one evening. "It's a great opportunity for the business. As for you, Robert and I have been talking, and we think it might be best if you stay here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Stay here? Without you?" "It's just that the new house won't have much space," she explained hurriedly. "And you're almost done with school. It wouldn't make sense to transfer now, right before your exams." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "So where am I supposed to live? On the street?" Don't be dramatic, Elizabeth, Mom scolded. You'll stay with your grandmother. She's already agreed to it. I stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. As I lay on my bed, hot tears of anger and hurt streaming down my face, I couldn't help but wonder, when did I become such an inconvenience to my own mother? The next few weeks were a blur of packing boxes and tearful goodbyes, not from me, but from Amy, who didn't want to leave her friends. I helped her pack, trying to put on a brave face for her sake. Will you come visit us, Lizzie? She asked, her big brown eyes full of tears. I hugged her tightly. Of course I will, Squirt. You can't get rid of me that easily. The day they left, I stood on the porch with Grandma, watching as the moving van pulled away. Mom gave me a quick hug, Robert nodded awkwardly, and then they were gone, taking Amy with them. Living with Grandma wasn't as bad as I'd feared. She was cool in her own way, giving me space when I needed it, but always there with a cup of tea and a listening ear when I wanted to talk. Still, it wasn't home. My 18th birthday rolled around faster than I expected. I woke up that morning feeling weird. Like I should be excited, but all I felt was empty. Mom called, of course. Happy birthday, sweetie. Her voice was bright, almost too cheery. I'm sorry we can't be there. Work's just crazy right now. We'll celebrate when we visit next month, okay? I knew we wouldn't. They hadn't visited once since they left. Sure, Mom. Sounds great. Grandma must have sensed my mood because she went all out. She let me invite a few friends over, ordered my favorite food, even baked a cake herself. For a few hours, I almost forgot about everything else. The next morning, Grandma called me into her home office. She had the serious look on her face that made my stomach clench. Sit down, Elizabeth, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. We need to talk. Oh God, I thought. She's kicking me out. Where am I gonna go? But then she smiled, reached into her desk drawer, and pulled out a small folder. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Open it. I did, and nearly dropped it when I realized what I was looking at. Grandma, is this? She nodded, her eyes twinkling. The company is yours now, Elizabeth. I see potential in you, kiddo. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and I know you'll do right by the business. But Mom and Robert, they're running it now. Grandma's face hardened slightly. They're running a branch. The main company, the heart of it all, that's yours now. I sat there, stunned. Me, barely 18, owner of a multi-million-dollar company? It felt like a dream. Or a nightmare. I don't know what to say. Grandma reached across the desk, squeezing my hand. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll give it your all. I nodded, still in shock. I will. I promise. She sat back, satisfied. Good. Now, I've got one more piece of advice for you, and I want you to listen carefully. I leaned in, hanging on her every word. Call your father. There's more to that story than you know. Talk to him. Take him on as a consultant if you want. But hear him out. It took me a week to work up the courage to call Dad. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. When I saw him, my heart clenched. He looked older, tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. There was an awkward silence. Then, suddenly, everything came pouring out. The divorce, Mom's remarriage, the move, Grandma's gift. Dad listened, his face a mix of emotions. When I finished, he took a deep breath. Lizzie, there's something you need to know about the divorce. And then he told me everything. How Mom had never respected him, constantly nagging and putting him down. How she called him a loser, made him feel worthless. How, after one particularly bad fight, he'd gotten drunk and made the biggest mistake of his life. I cheated on her, he admitted, his voice heavy with shame. Once. I regretted it immediately, but your mother, she used it against me. Threatened to sue, to take everything. She demanded I leave, give her all the property, leave you kids. She even wanted alimony. I sat there, stunned. This didn't sound like the mother I knew. Or thought I knew. Why didn't you fight it? I asked. Dad's eyes met mine, full of sadness and love. Because of you and Amy. I didn't want you to go through a messy, public divorce. I thought it would be easier this way. As we talked, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my dad back. Before we left, I took a deep breath and asked, Dad, how would you feel about helping me with the company? As a consultant? The smile that spread across his face was answer enough. The months flew by in a whirlwind of studying, exams, and late-night cram sessions. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage at my high school graduation, diploma in hand. Grandma was in the audience, beaming with pride. Mom and Robert were conspicuously absent, but I'd learned not to expect much from that quarter. As summer rolled in, I threw myself into college applications. With Grandma's encouragement and Dad's long-distance support, I set my sights high. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I could hardly believe it. But the real shocker came when I got the financial aid package from my top choice. Full ride, I breathed, staring at the letter in disbelief. Grandma whooped, pulling me into a bear hug. I knew you could do it, kiddo. All those late nights and competitions paid off. I'd chosen to major in business management. It seemed like the smart choice, given that I now had a company to run. The idea still felt surreal, but I was determined to make Grandma proud. To celebrate my college acceptance, Grandma insisted on throwing a little party. Just the two of us, some fancy takeout, and a bottle of sparkling cider. Grandma wasn't about to let me drink champagne, even if I was legally an adult now. We were halfway through our meal when the doorbell rang. Grandma frowned, clearly not expecting anyone. I'll get it, I said, putting down my fork. I opened the door and felt my stomach drop. There, looking annoyed and impatient, stood my mother and Robert. Before I could say anything, they brushed past me into the house. Mom didn't bother with pleasantries. Mother, we need to talk about the company. Now. I watched, stunned, as Mom launched into a tirade. She didn't even glance my way, didn't ask about graduation or college. It was like I wasn't even there. Why can't we access the main accounts, she demanded. And why are you blocking the transfer of capital to our subsidiary? Grandma's eyes narrowed. Because it's not your decision to make anymore, Helen. The company belongs to Elizabeth now. She's the one who'll decide its future and manage its finances. The room went dead silent. The tension in the room was palpable after Grandma's revelation about the company. I watched as a series of emotions flashed across Mom's face, shock, anger, and then, calculation. Suddenly, her entire demeanor changed. Elizabeth, sweetheart, she said, her voice soft and sickly sweet. I've missed you so much. Why don't you come live with us? I blinked, caught off guard by this sudden change. Mom stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I instinctively stepped back. We've settled in so nicely in the new city. We have a beautiful house, and there's a room just for you. We could set up a desk, get you a new computer for your studies and work. No, Mom, I said, my voice steady. I'm happy here. I have my friends, my school. And Grandma needs me. Mom's smile faltered for a second before she rallied. Well, if that's the issue, we could always move back here. We could live in our old house, just like before. Wouldn't that be nice? I shook my head. It's not about the house, Mom. It's everything. I saw the anger building in her eyes, barely contained. Before she could speak, I decided to ask the question that had been burning inside me for months. Mom, why did you really divorce Dad? She stiffened, caught off guard. Well, your father, he cheated on me. Multiple times. I was tired of it. He abandoned us for his mistress, didn't even pay alimony. That's not true, I said. Dad told me everything. There was only one time, and it was because of how you treated him. He didn't abandon us, you kicked him out. And he's been paying alimony regularly. Mom's face contorted with rage. How dare you? You ungrateful little brat. You have no right to meddle in my personal life. Everything here belongs to me, and I decide who lives where. Grandma, who had been quietly watching this exchange, finally stepped forward. Her voice was calm but filled with a steel I'd never heard before. That's quite enough, Helen, she said. You seem to have forgotten a few key points. This house? The company? They belong to me, not you. I gave the company to Elizabeth because I trust her judgment far more than I trust yours right now. I think it's time for you to leave. I watched, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest, as Grandma firmly ushered Mom and Robert out of the house. The door closed behind them with a final sounding click. As we stood there, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief wash over me. I'd lost something today, the last illusions I had about my mother. But I'd gained something too. A certainty about my path forward, and the knowledge that I wasn't alone on it. What now? I asked, my voice muffled against Grandma's shoulder. She pulled back, giving me a small smile. Now? Now we get back to celebrating your college acceptance. And tomorrow, we start planning for your future, your real future, not the one your mother tried to force on you. The morning after the confrontation with Mom and Robert, I woke up to the sound of voices downstairs. Curious, I crept down the stairs and peeked into the living room. To my surprise, I saw Dad sitting on the couch, deep in conversation with Grandma. As I sat down next to them, Grandma explained why she'd called Dad over. I've been thinking about Amy, she said. Your mother, well, I'm not sure she's in the best position to care for her right now. I've suggested that your father seek custody of Amy. I felt a surge of hope. Really? Dad, are you going to do it? He ran a hand through his hair, looking both nervous and determined. Yeah, I am. It won't be easy, but Amy deserves better than what she's getting right now. I couldn't help it, I threw my arms around him. Thank you, Dad. As we pulled apart, Grandma cleared her throat. There's more, she said. I've hired a private investigator to look into your mother and Robert's affairs. Over the next few weeks, life fell into a strange new rhythm. I started my college classes, throwing myself into my studies with a determination I'd never felt before. Dad came over regularly, and we worked on rebuilding our relationship. It felt good, having him back in my life. Then, about 3 weeks after that morning conversation, Grandma called us both over. Her face was grave as we sat down. The investigator's report came in, she said without preamble. And, well, it's worse than we thought. She laid out the facts, each one hitting like a punch to the gut. Mom had been cheating on Dad for years, long before the divorce. Her affair with Robert had started while she was still married to Dad. There were hotel receipts, records of expensive gifts, all painting a damning picture. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Robert is a con man, Grandma said, her voice hard. He's done this before, seducing wealthy women, convincing them to move assets around, and then disappearing with the money. I felt sick. So when they wanted to move the company's capital? Grandma nodded. Exactly. He was planning to steal it all and run. We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Grandma said that we needed to confront Mom with the truth. The meeting was set for the next day. Mom arrived at Grandma's house looking annoyed and impatient. Her expression changed to one of surprise when she saw Dad there too. What followed was one of the most painful conversations I've ever been part of. Grandma laid out all the evidence, the affair, Robert's history of fraud, his plans to steal from the company. With each revelation, I watched my mother's face, hoping to see some sign of remorse or understanding. Instead, all I saw was denial. This is ridiculous, Mom sputtered. Robert loves me. He would never. You're all just jealous of our happiness. Dad tried to reason with her. Helen, please. Look at the evidence. Think about Amy. Is this really the kind of man you want around our daughter? But Mom wouldn't hear it. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. I don't have to listen to this. Robert is a good man, and I trust him completely. You're all just trying to ruin my life. With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As we sat there, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of what was sure to be a long, difficult battle. But looking at Dad and Grandma, I knew I wasn't facing it alone. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Dad, with Grandma's unwavering support and her lawyer's expertise, filed for custody of Amy. I tried to stay focused on my studies, but it was hard not to get caught up in the drama unfolding around me. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and I insisted on being there. The proceedings were grueling. Mom's lawyer tried to paint Dad as an absent father, but our lawyer came prepared. He presented evidence of Dad's consistent alimony payments, his attempts to stay in touch with us, and the stability of his current living situation. Then came the bombshell, the private investigator's report on Robert's fraudulent past and their plans to embezzle from the company. I watched Mom's face as the evidence was presented. She looked shocked, then angry, then lost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When the judge announced his decision, granting Dad full custody of Amy, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Amy would be safe, sadness that it had come to this. As we left the courthouse, Amy in Dad's arms, Mom approached us. "This isn't over," she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. Grandma stepped between us. "Yes, Helen, it is. Go home." The hits kept coming for Mom after that. The judge ordered her to pay child support to Dad for Amy. It was a reversal that clearly shocked her. She'd always assumed she'd be the one receiving support, not paying it. I threw myself into my studies and learning about the company, trying to distance myself from the ongoing drama. But it was hard to ignore the satisfaction I felt when I heard that Robert had left Mom, running off with another woman and a significant chunk of Mom's personal savings. It was a crisp autumn evening when Dad called me, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Your mother showed up at my place today," he said. "She wanted to reconcile. Said she'd made a mistake, that she wanted us to be a family again." My heart clenched. Part of me, a small, childish part, wanted him to say yes. Wanted our family back the way it used to be. But I knew too much now. We'd all been through too much. I told her no, Dad said firmly. I told her that ship had sailed a long time ago, and that I wouldn't put you or Amy through that again. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Good," I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. "You deserve better, Dad. We all do." There was a pause, and when Dad spoke again, I could hear the smile in his voice. "When did you get so wise, Lizzie?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I learned from the best." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my room at Grandma's house. My textbooks were spread out on the desk, next to a stack of reports from the company. Photos of me with Dad and Amy smiled back at me from the bulletin board. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself a year ago. It wasn't perfect, there was still so much to figure out, so many challenges ahead. But it was real. It was mine. I thought about Mom, suddenly alone after all her scheming and manipulations. I felt a twinge of pity, but it was overshadowed by a sense of justice. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. As for me? I had a family that loved me, a company to run, and a future full of possibilities. It wasn't the path I'd expected, but standing at the threshold of my new life, I realized something important. Time flies when you're juggling college and a multi-million-dollar company. Before I knew it, I was halfway through my degree, buried in textbooks and financial reports. Weekdays were a blur of lectures and late-night study sessions. But weekends? Those were sacred. Every Friday, I'd pack a bag and head home to Dad and Amy. "Lizzie," Amy would squeal, tackling me with a hug the moment I walked in. At 10, she was all gangly limbs and endless energy. Dad would emerge from the kitchen, usually wearing an apron. "Just in time for dinner," he'd say with a grin. Those weekends became my anchor. We'd eat together, Amy chattering about school, Dad and I discussing the company. After Amy went to bed, we'd often stay up late, poring over business strategies. Sundays usually found us at Grandma's. She'd cook up a storm, filling the house with the smell of roast chicken and apple pie. After lunch, we'd sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. "I always knew you had it in you, Elizabeth," Grandma would say, squeezing my hand. As graduation approached, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Dad was true to his word, running the company with skill while preparing me to take over. "I'm ready to hand over the reins whenever you are," he told me one evening. I hugged him tight. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Life wasn't perfect. There were challenges ahead, decisions to be made, a company to run. But as I looked at my little family, Dad, Amy, Grandma, I knew we could face anything together.